Look at the walls of the world's greatest museums. You will see bright sunflowers and swirling night skies that cost tens of millions of dollars. These paintings are some of the most valuable objects on Earth today. People travel across oceans just to stand in front of them for a few minutes. They represent the peak of human creativity and the highest level of financial success in the art world. Now, try to see the man behind these famous colors. He was not a wealthy man or a celebrity during his lifetime. In fact, he spent most of his days in poverty, often choosing between buying paint or buying a simple piece of bread. The contrast between his difficult life and his current fame is one of the most emotional stories in the history of modern art. During his 10 years as an artist, he created over 2,000 works of art, but he only sold 1 or 2. He lived on the kindness of others and the small amounts of money his brother could spare. He died feeling like a failure, never knowing that one day his name would be known in every corner of the globe. His journey was one of pure, unrewarded passion. What do you see when you look at a painting by Vincent van Gogh? Do you see the beauty of nature, or do you feel the sadness of a lonely man? Most people recognize his style instantly, but few truly understand the heavy heart that guided his brush. Before we dive into his remarkable life, take a moment to consider what you already know about this legendary Dutch painter. We're happy to have you with us as we explore this deep and moving biography. It is wonderful to see so many people from different parts of the world coming together to share this story. Where are you joining us from today? Please share your location in the comments, as it is inspiring to see how far Vincent's influence has traveled across the world since he first started painting. If you find value in these stories of great figures from history, please consider subscribing to the channel. We aim to bring you the lives of the most influential people in a clear and respectful way. By following along, you ensure that you won't miss our upcoming deep dives into history. Now, let us turn back the clock to the mid-19th century and find where it all began. Our story starts in the quiet countryside of the Netherlands in March 1853. The air was cold, and the landscape was flat and green. In a small village called Groot Zundert, a boy named Vincent was born into a family of ministers and art dealers. It was a world of strict rules, deep religion, and a very traditional way of living that Vincent would soon struggle to follow. His early years were spent in a home where duty and faith were more important than personal happiness. His father was a local pastor, and the family expected Vincent to follow a respectable career path. However, even as a child, he was different. He was a quiet, serious boy who preferred wandering through the fields alone rather than playing with the other children in the village square. As he grew older, Vincent was a young man searching for a place to belong. He did not seem to fit into the normal social circles of his time. He was often described as awkward and overly sensitive. He had a strange intensity in his eyes that made some people uncomfortable. This sense of being an outsider would follow him for the rest of his life, making every social interaction difficult. His professional life began with a series of failures. His family first sent him to work at an international art gallery in London. At first, he was successful, but a broken heart and a growing dislike for the business of art changed him. He became rude to customers and stopped caring about sales. Eventually, the gallery fired him, marking the first of many professional disappointments in his young life. After losing his job, he tried to become a school teacher in England. He worked hard, but he was not a natural educator. He felt a deep, burning desire to help people, but he didn't know how. He moved from one small job to another, always feeling like he was walking down the wrong path. Each time he failed, his family became more worried about his future and his mental state. In a moment of desperation, he turned to religion. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and become a minister. He studied long hours for the entrance exams, but he found the academic requirements too difficult. He could not master the Greek and Latin needed for the church. Still, his heart was set on serving the poor, so he decided to become a lay preacher in a mining region. He moved to the Borinage, a poor coal mining district in Belgium. Life there was brutal and dark. The miners lived in terrible conditions, and Vincent felt he should live exactly like them. He gave away his decent clothes, his comfortable bed, and his food to those who had nothing. He slept on the cold floor and covered his face with coal dust to show his solidarity with the workers. The official church was not happy with his behavior. They expected their preachers to be clean, respectable, and dignified. They saw Vincent's extreme poverty as a sign of mental instability rather than true holiness. To the church leaders, he was an embarrassment. They took away his position and told him to leave. Once again, Vincent was alone, rejected by the very people he tried to help. Failure is a heavy word to carry. For Vincent, it was a constant companion. At 27 years old, he had no money, no wife, and no career. To his neighbors and family, he looked like a man who had wasted every opportunity. However, failure can also be a teacher. It strips away everything that is not essential, leaving only the truth of what a person truly needs to survive. He spent months wandering the countryside, hungry and lost. He was searching for a way to express the deep emotions he felt inside. He had always loved drawing, but he had never considered it a serious career. In the silence of the Belgian fields, he began to draw the miners and the peasants. He realized that through art, he could communicate things that words could never truly explain. The realization hit him with incredible force. He didn't just want to draw. He needed to draw. It was as if a light had finally been turned on in a dark room. He wrote to his brother, Theo, explaining that he had found his true calling. He was going to become an artist. He didn't care about fame or money anymore. He only cared about capturing the human soul on paper. Most famous artists begin their training as young children, but Vincent was starting very late. He had to teach himself the basics of anatomy, light, and shadow. He practiced for hours every single day, filling hundreds of sketchbooks with drawings of hands, feet, and faces. He worked with a feverish energy, trying to make up for the years he had lost in his search for purpose. Art became his religion. Instead of preaching with a Bible, he would now tell stories through lines and shapes. He believed that the lives of poor people were just as beautiful and important as the lives of kings. This belief stayed with him until the very end. He was finally on the path he was meant for, but the road ahead would be filled with even more pain. The year 1880 marked the end of Vincent the preacher and the birth of Vincent the artist. He committed himself fully to this new life, knowing that there was no turning back. But an artist needs supplies, food, and a place to live. He had no way to pay for these things himself. This was the moment when the most important relationship of his life became his only hope for survival. Enter Theo van Gogh, Vincent's younger brother. Theo was the opposite of Vincent in many ways. He was a successful art dealer in Paris, well-dressed and respected in society. Despite their differences, the two shared a bond that was stronger than anything else in their lives. Theo was the only person who truly understood Vincent's genius and the kindness hidden behind his difficult personality. Theo provided what we call unconditional support. This means he helped Vincent even when Vincent was angry, sick, or ungrateful. For 10 years, Theo sent a portion of his salary every month to his brother. Without this money, Vincent would have likely died of hunger long before he finished his greatest works. Theo wasn't just a brother, he was the foundation of Vincent's entire existence. The relationship was built on more than just money. They were best friends who shared their deepest thoughts through the mail. Because they lived apart for many years, they wrote letters constantly. Today, we have over 600 letters from Vincent to Theo. These documents are a gift to history, allowing us to read the thoughts of a man who was often too shy to speak his mind aloud. In these letters, Vincent wrote about everything. He described the books he read, the colors he saw in the sky, and the deep loneliness that sometimes crushed his spirit. He also wrote about his technical struggles with painting. We know Vincent's heart because he opened it so completely to his brother. It was a long-distance conversation that lasted until the very end of their lives. Reading these letters, you see a man of incredible intelligence. Vincent was not just a wild artist throwing paint at a wall. He was well-read and spoke several languages fluently. He thought deeply about the philosophy of art. His letters are full of wisdom and poetic descriptions of the world around him. They prove that he was a man of great culture, despite his humble way of living. Loneliness was a heavy burden for Vincent, but Theo's replies were his light. Whenever a letter arrived from Paris, Vincent felt a sense of peace. It was proof that someone in the world cared about him and believed in his talent. Theo never gave up on him, even when their parents and friends told him to stop wasting his money on a brother who seemed to be losing his mind. The brothers eventually made a formal deal. Theo would send Vincent money for living expenses and professional art supplies. In exchange, Vincent would send every painting and drawing he created to Theo in Paris. Theo would then try to sell them to collectors. It was a business partnership, but one where only one person was making money and the other was creating a legacy. This arrangement was not always easy. Vincent often felt guilty about taking Theo's hard-earned money. He felt like a child who could not support himself. This guilt pushed him to work even harder. He wanted to produce enough great art to eventually pay Theo back for every cent he had received. He viewed his paintings as a debt of honor that he had to fulfill. The pressure on Vincent was immense. He knew that Theo was working long hours in a busy city to fund his life in the country. This motivated him to paint from sunrise to sunset. He didn't want to waste a single drop of the paint that Theo had bought for him. Their bond was a beautiful example of how one person's belief can fuel another person's greatness. As the years passed, their letters became a record of a shared dream. They both hoped that one day the art world would see what they saw. They believed that Vincent's work would eventually bring comfort and beauty to many people. Little did they know, their partnership would change the course of art history forever. The next step in this journey would take Vincent to the heart of the art world. Before his style became famous for its bright colors, Vincent's work was very different. During his time in the Netherlands, he used what people call dark, earthy tones. He painted in browns, grays, and deep greens. His goal was to show the hard, honest life of the working class. He didn't want his paintings to look pretty. He wanted them to look real and full of truth. His most famous work from this period is titled The Potato Eaters. It shows a family of peasants sitting around a small table in a dark room. Their hands are rough and bony from working in the soil. Their faces are tired but dignified. Vincent wanted to show that these people had earned their food through hard work. It was a powerful, somber painting that showed his deep empathy. At the time, the art world was moving in a different direction, and The Potato Eaters was not well received. People found it too dark and depressing. They wanted art that was light and decorative. Vincent was disappointed, but he refused to change his style just to please others. However, he knew he needed to learn more if he wanted to grow as an artist. In 1886, Vincent decided to move to Paris to live with Theo. This was a massive change for a man who loved the quiet countryside. Paris was the center of the world for artists. It was the place where new ideas were born every day. When he arrived, he was shocked by what he saw. A new group of artists called the Impressionists were changing everything about how art was made. Meeting these artists, like Claude Monet and Camille Pissarro, was a revelation. He saw paintings that were full of light and bright, pure colors. The Impressionists didn't try to paint every detail of a scene. Instead, they painted the impression of the light at a specific moment. Vincent's eyes were opened to a completely new way of seeing the world. He realized his dark palette was a thing of the past. Suddenly, his canvases began to change. The heavy browns disappeared, replaced by vibrant blues, yellows, and reds. He started using shorter, quicker brushstrokes. He learned how to put two different colors next to each other to make them appear even brighter. This was the new Vincent. He was learning how to paint the feeling of light, not just the objects that the light touched. Paris was exciting, but it was also exhausting. The city was loud, crowded, and full of smoke. Vincent was a man who needed nature and fresh air to feel balanced. He spent his time in cafes talking about art, but these conversations often turned into arguments. His intense personality made it hard for him to stay calm in the busy social scenes of the French capital. He began to feel trapped. The grey skies of Paris during the winter started to affect his mood. He missed the open fields and the bright sun. He wanted to find a place where the colors were even more intense than what he had seen in the Impressionist paintings. He dreamed of a place that looked like the Japanese prints he loved so much, full of clear light and simple beauty. He decided that he needed to move south. He had heard that the light in the south of France was different, stronger and more golden. He hoped that the warmth would heal his body and his mind. He was searching for a place where he could create a new kind of art, far away from the distractions and the cold weather of the north. In February 1888, he boarded a train for a town called Arles. As the train moved south, the snow disappeared and the sun began to shine. When he arrived, he found exactly what he was looking for. The landscape was a sea of yellow and blue. This move would mark the beginning of the most productive and famous period of his entire life. Leaving Theo in Paris was difficult, as they had become very close during their 2 years together. However, they both knew that Vincent needed to be in nature to survive. They promised to keep writing, and Theo promised to keep sending the supplies Vincent would need to capture the southern sun. Vincent stepped off the train in Arles with a heart full of hope and a bag full of brushes. He did not know it yet, but the next 2 years would be a whirlwind of creation and crisis. He was about to produce the paintings that would define his legacy. The yellow sun of the south was waiting for him, and he was ready to give it everything he had. The quiet town of Arles would never be the same after the arrival of the red-haired Dutchman. Arles was a paradise for Vincent's eyes. He was amazed by the intensity of the colors. The fruit trees were in bloom, and the fields were covered in flowers. He worked with a speed that was almost frightening. He would go out into the fields early in the morning and stay until the sun went down, often completing an entire painting in just a few hours. The heat didn't bother him. It inspired him. It inspired him. This is when he painted his famous series of sunflowers. For Vincent, the sunflower was a symbol of gratitude and happiness. He used many different shades of yellow to show the flowers in various stages of life, from bright and fresh to wilting and brown. These paintings were full of thick layers of paint that gave them a three-dimensional feel. He was literally building his images with color. He rented a small house with a yellow exterior, which we now know as the Yellow House. He spent his little money on simple furniture to make it a home. He was incredibly proud of this place. For the first time in his life, he had a studio of his own. He dreamed of turning this house into a community where artists could live and work together in peace. His vision was for a studio of the South. He felt that artists were stronger when they supported each other. He invited several of his friends from Paris to join him, but only one accepted the invitation. Paul Gauguin. Vincent was thrilled. He spent weeks preparing the house, painting beautiful pictures to decorate Gauguin's bedroom. He was desperate for friendship and intellectual company. Gauguin arrived in October, and at first, everything was perfect. They painted together in the fields and talked about art late into the night. They shared their techniques and their dreams. However, Gauguin was an arrogant and dominant man, and Vincent was sensitive and intense. It didn't take long for their different personalities to start clashing. The peace of the Yellow House began to fade. The arguments became more frequent and more violent. They disagreed about everything, from how to use color to which artists were the best. Vincent was terrified that Gauguin would leave him alone again. His mental health, which had always been fragile, began to break under the pressure of the conflict. He couldn't sleep, and he was working too hard without eating enough. The tension reached a breaking point on 2 days before Christmas in 1888. After a particularly bad argument, Gauguin left the house to go for a walk. Vincent, in a state of total mental confusion and despair, did something that shocked the world. In a moment of extreme emotional pain, he took a razor and cut off part of his own left ear. He wrapped the piece of his ear in paper and took it to a local woman before going home to sleep. The next morning, the police found him unconscious in the yellow house. He was taken to the local hospital immediately. Gauguin left Arles and never saw Vincent again. The dream of an artist community had ended in a nightmare of blood and confusion. When Vincent woke up in the hospital, he had no clear memory of what had happened. He was confused and deeply ashamed of his actions. He wrote to Theo, trying to apologize and explain his state of mind. He was diagnosed with acute mania, a term used at the time for a mental breakdown. For the first time, he had to face the fact that his mind was seriously ill. The people of Arles were frightened of him. They didn't understand mental illness and saw him as a dangerous madman. A group of neighbors even signed a petition to have him removed from the town. This rejection hurt Vincent more than the physical wound on his head. He felt like an outcast in the very place where he had found so much beauty and light. Despite his suffering, he did not stop painting. Even in the hospital, he asked for his brushes and colors. He painted the doctors who treated him and the view of the hospital garden. His work became a way to hold on to reality. It was as if every stroke of the brush was a step back towards sanity. He showed incredible strength by choosing to create beauty during his darkest days. He eventually returned to the yellow house, but he was afraid to be alone. He knew that the attacks of his illness could return at any time. He felt like a prisoner in his own mind. He realized that he could no longer live by himself without help. He needed a place where he could be safe and where he could continue to paint under supervision. This period in Arles was a time of both incredible artistic success and terrible personal tragedy. He had created some of the most famous paintings in history, but he had lost his health and his only friend. He had found the light he was looking for, but it had burned him. He was now ready to take a difficult step toward a different kind of life. He decided to voluntarily enter a mental asylum. He wanted to protect himself and the people around him. He was tired of fighting his own mind in the middle of a town that didn't want him. He packed his few belongings and prepared to leave the yellow house forever. His journey was not over, but it was moving into a much quieter, more reflective phase. As he left Arles, he looked back at the fields of sunflowers one last time. He had given this town his heart, and in return, it had given him his most famous works. Now, he was heading toward a place of rest, where he would find the inspiration for his most iconic masterpiece of all. The stars were waiting for him in the night sky over Saint-Cloud. In May 1889, Vincent arrived at the asylum of Saint-Paul-de-Mauzol in Saint-Remy. This was a place for people with mental health struggles to find rest and safety. Vincent was not a prisoner there. He was a patient who chose to stay for his own well-being. He understood that his sick minds needed medical care, just like a sick body would need a doctor. The doctors gave him 2 rooms, one to sleep in and one to use as a painting studio. Life in the asylum was very quiet and followed a strict routine. This structure was good for him. When he was feeling well, he was allowed to go out into the garden or the nearby fields to paint. When he was feeling sick, he stayed in his room and rested until the crisis passed. He called his painting his lightning conductor. He believed that by focusing all his energy on his art, he could prevent his mental illness from striking him too hard. Every day, he fought against the darkness by surrounding himself with color. The asylum was a place of healing for him, but it was also a place where he felt a deep, quiet sadness about his situation. From his bedroom window, he had a view of the hills and a large cypress tree. He would sit by the window early in the morning before the sun came up and watch the sky change colors. He saw the stars and the moon in a way that most people never do. These quiet hours of watching the night would lead to the creation of his most famous painting. That painting was The Starry Night. It shows a small, peaceful village sleeping under a sky that is alive with energy. The stars are not just points of light, they are giant, swirling whirlpools of fire. The moon is a bright orange crescent. In the foreground, a dark cypress tree reaches up toward the heavens like a flame. It is a vision of the universe in motion. People often ask why the stars in the painting are swirling. It wasn't because he was seeing things that weren't there. Instead, he was painting the energy and the movement of the wind and the light. He wanted to show that the world is not static. It is full of life and power. The Starry Nights is a map of his emotions and his connection to the infinite universe. The cypress trees became a major theme for him during this time. To many, these trees represent mourning or death because they are often planted in cemeteries. But for Vincent, they were beautiful and full of life. He loved their dark color and their wavy shapes. He saw them as a bridge between the earth and the sky, representing the human desire to reach for something higher. His days were defined by a simple rhythm: wake up, paint, eat, rest, and sleep. This repetition helped him stay calm. He painted over 150 pictures during his year at the asylum. Some of them were copies of other artists he admired, and some were landscapes of the hills. Even though he was behind walls, his imagination was free to travel anywhere. The world inside his head was far more colorful than the quiet rooms of the asylum. He used his memory to bring back the bright yellows of Arles and the deep greens of the Netherlands. He was creating a world where he could feel safe and happy, even when his real life was full of struggle. Art was his only medicine, and he took it every single day. By the spring of 1890, he felt stronger. He wanted to be closer to Theo and the new life. Theo was starting in Paris. Theo had recently married a woman named Jo and had a young son whom they named Vincent. The artist wanted to see his nephew and live in a place that wasn't an asylum. He decided it was time to leave the south and return north. Vincent moved to Auvers-sur-Oise, a small village near Paris, in May 1890. He lived in a tiny room above a cafe and was cared for by a local doctor who loved art. For a few weeks, he seemed happy. He was painting the vast wheat fields that surrounded the village. He said the landscape made him feel free, but also deeply lonely and sad. One of his last great paintings was Wheat Field with Crows. It shows a golden field under a dark, stormy sky. 3 paths lead into the distance, but they don't seem to go anywhere. A flock of black crows flies over the grain. Many people see this painting as a message of his coming end. The colors are beautiful, but the atmosphere is heavy and full of tension. The crows in the painting are often seen as symbols of death or bad luck. However, Vincent also saw them as part of the natural cycle of life. The golden wheat represents the harvest, the end of a season's work. He was putting all his complicated feelings into the landscape. He felt that the end of his own personal harvest was approaching, and he was tired of fighting the storm. On July 27, 1890, Vincent went out into the fields as usual. But this time, he didn't bring his brushes. He returned to the cafe later that evening with a gunshot wound in his chest. No one saw what happened, and it is widely believed that he shot himself in a moment of extreme despair. He walked back to his room and lay down on his small bed. Theo rushed from Paris to be by his side. For 2 days, the brothers talked and held hands. Vincent was calm and said he was ready to go. His last words to Theo were, "The sadness will last forever." He died in his brother's arms on July 29. He was only 37 years old. He was buried in a simple grave in the village cemetery, surrounded by the wheat fields. Theo was completely destroyed by the loss of his brother. His health began to fail almost immediately. He died just 6 months after Vincent, leaving behind his wife, Jo, and their baby. The 2 brothers were eventually buried side by side in Auvers. Their lives were so connected that they could not stay apart for long, even in death. It was the end of a tragic family story. After they died, the world almost forgot about Vincent van Gogh. But there was a secret hero in this story. Jo van Gogh Bonga, Theo's widow. She was left with hundreds of paintings that no one wanted to buy. Most people told her to throw them away. But Jo had read the letters between the brothers and understood that Vincent was a genius. She dedicated her life to his memory. Jo worked tirelessly to organize exhibitions of Vincent's work. She translated and published the letters so people could understand the man behind the art. Slowly, the world began to listen. People saw the emotion in the brushstrokes and the beauty in the colors. Within 20 years, Vincent went from a forgotten failure to the most famous painter in the world. Jo had saved his legacy for all of us. Today, Vincent van Gogh is a global icon. His face is on everything from posters to coffee mugs. But more importantly, his art brings comfort to millions of people who feel lonely or misunderstood. He proved that even a life full of pain can produce something of incredible beauty. His story reminds us that success is not always measured by the money you make while you are alive. The lesson of Vincent's life is one of courage. He continued to create even when the world told him he was nothing. He followed his heart even when it led him into the darkness. His work is a gift to humanity, a reminder that there is light even in our most difficult moments. Every time you look at a star or a sunflower, you are seeing the world through his eyes. Thank you for joining us for this journey through the life of a man who changed how we see the world. It is a long and emotional story, and we hope it has moved you. If you learned something new today, perhaps a single word or a fact about his life, please share it with us. We look forward to seeing you again for our next story. Until then, keep looking for the light.